Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola law firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. We have a special program for today on prenuptial agreements, and our guest is David Badanes, and he's an attorney, an experienced matrimonial attorney with offices both in Nassau and Suffolk County. David, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thank you for having me.
I know that you also lecture about prenups and other matrimonial issues, and I'd like you to just give us, our listeners, a little background on that today. Let's start out by what is a prenuptial agreement?
Sure. A prenup is just a simple contract between couples who intend to get married. In order to be valid, though, a prenup agreement must be written, signed, and what's called properly acknowledged, which is a legal term that attorneys would understand.
Okay, and it can also be done, it might have a different name if it's done after the marriage has occurred?
That is correct. A prenup is before you get married, and then after the marriage, you can have what's called the post-nuptial agreement. And that's absolutely valid, and the same things I just said apply to that as well.
And you can sort of amend it, just like you might amend wills.
You amend it like any other contract. You can amend it. You can tear it up. It's just a contract.
And why is it a good idea to have it? I mean, why would you think about having it before you get married? Does it taint the marriage?
Absolutely not, actually. There are a lot of studies that indicate that a prenup actually helps strengthen a marriage. Most couples do not talk about finances before the marriage. With a prenup, it actually forces couples to address their finances and those issues, and then they get to put all the financial cards on the table.
And so part of it is about financial disclosure.
Absolutely.
And is it especially also advisable if there's an inequity in the partners, or if one person has children or other relatives from a prior marriage?
Well, in terms of why you should have a prenup,
Yes.
You're saying? Well, there's a lot of reasons you should have a prenup, and it's not just for the rich. A lot of people say, oh, I have to have a lot of money. There could be a lot of reasons. Your family may have a family business. You may have a summer home. Your family may have another home that you think is going to be willed to you, and you don't want that to go to your partner. There could be a lot of reasons, and like you just said, having children is another reason. You know, it goes from A to Z in reasons why you should have a prenup.
And a lot of these issues would have to get resolved should there be a divorce, and it'll be like an expensive, a lengthy, and uncertain process. So this is like an insurance policy or a way of streamlining and saving the stress and uncertainty should there be a dissolution of the marriage.
Absolutely. I call a prenup an insurance policy. Just like you have car insurance and home insurance, just because you have home insurance, you don't want to get your house robbed, but if it does happen or if something happens to your house, you have that insurance. And just like getting married, you have a prenup, something happens, it will save you money in the long run.
And also time and anxiety and uncertainty for both people.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like a disaster. In case your marriage is a disaster, it will help.
Well, I'm not. I guess that's a funny way to put it.
You're not
but
hoping that it will, but
right. Yes.
So, but there shouldn't be any negative connotation to it.
Absolutely not.
And in order for it to be valid, should each party have a separate attorney?
Absolutely. That's the best way to do it. It can be invalidated by the courts, just like any contract. And one way that it can be invalidated is if one person does not have an attorney. That doesn't make it automatically invalidated, but then the courts and the judge are going to kind of look at it with more closer eyes.
And another possible ground for invalidating it would be if there's a misrepresentation or significant misrepresentation of the assets of the people at that time.
Absolutely. If in my prenups, people have to list what their significant assets are, and let's say they did not list that, and it comes, that it's true that you forgot to, didn't do it for whatever reason, yes, that can be invalidated.
And it's almost like the statement of net worth that's part of a divorce proceeding. You're usually doing it early on, so there's full disclosure, and people are aware of, what will happen in the event of a dissolution.
Correct. Absolutely. That's right.
And what are some things that might not cover?
Well, although we talked about children, one thing it cannot do is you can't say, well, in case of our divorce and we have children throughout the marriage, one party is going to get custody or we're going to have joint custody. Though that is invalid by the courts, it's what's called against public policy. So you can't say who's going to have custody in your prenup. I mean, you could put that in there, but the courts are not necessarily going to listen to it.
Even if you put an agreement to share custody or joint custody, it wouldn't necessarily be valid.
It would not be valid at all.
And by the same token, could you put language about child support?
Same thing, right. You cannot say that I'm going to waive child support or I'm going to pay less than what the law says or try to change it in any way. The courts always have the ability to change that, whether it's child support or child custody.
And these days, people conceive children in different ways and may even postpone the day. Can you put in representations about children or like conditions of the marriage?
Well, you could say that you could put that we are not intending to have children or intending to adopt. But again, that really would not be something the courts would, validate or necessarily uphold.
And the same thing, you couldn't put in like conditions of the marriage that someone's going to be a homemaker and someone's going to work.
Well, not in that sense. Again, you could put some conditions about perhaps, let's say there was a home that was owned prior to the marriage, and I'll just say the wife owned the home, and it may say, well, no matter what the husband does, no matter how much he fixes the house, how much he cleans the house, whatever he does, that would not mean that he would own the house.
And
that in that sense.
And that could be the same as true of a business. If one spouse owned the business, no matter what the other spouse did to expand the business, perpetuate it, save it.
Right. That's right. So in that sense, you can put, I wouldn't really call those conditions. It would just say that it would just list what does not turn what's in law language called a separate property, all of a sudden magically turns into marital property just because you did the things you just mentioned.
And it could be true for a car or anything else.
Any kind of asset from A to Z.
Okay. Can you just elaborate more on what would have to happen, what the process would be like so that it is a valid prenuptial agreement?
Well, first of all, it shouldn't enter into a prenup the day of the marriage or the day before. It should really be entered into really many months beforehand. I recommend at least 2 to 3 months before the marriage date. But a lot of times people call me at, somewhat the last second, and I tell them that this is not, the best practice. I will advise them that we could try to rush this to get it through as quick as possible. So the first thing, again, is to get it done to start the process many months before the wedding date. And then again, like we mentioned before, each side should have their own attorney. And if one party can't afford an attorney, let's say I'm going to get married, I could pay for my, fiance's attorney. That's perfectly fine. Just because I pay that attorney doesn't mean that they're my attorney. It's still my fiance.
Now, if you pick the attorney, that might cloud it a little bit.
It could, but again, just because I pick the attorney, that attorney has an ethical duty to represent that other party. Just because I paid them and picked them out of the, because I know them, doesn't necessarily invalid. Again, not the best thing to do, but it wouldn't necessarily make the prenup invalid.
And again, the disclosure is important as well.
Absolutely. Again, as we mentioned before, in that prenup, there should be a list of, again, the major, you don't have to go down to every little penny, but, the major assets, what you're trying to protect. Absolutely. That should
and this could be personal property or real property or a business or something along those lines.
Right. Personal property, real property, property that, again, if you think you could put that, my parents own a summer home or they own their own home here. And even though I don't own it now, I believe, as maybe I'm the only offspring, if that becomes my property later, you could do that too.
Would a will be part of it because of, this way you can leave property to, let's say prior children or something along those lines?
Well, will would be its own document, but what you can do, there's, as you probably know as an attorney, there's the right of election. So you can waive that right of election, which means that after you're married, your spouse typically is allowed to have 1/3 of your estate. But you can waive what that called that right of election. That can be put in your prenup, and that happens many times.
That you agree to waive the right of election.
Correct.
So if that might taint or make a will contest harder.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Okay. Should you should people discuss this with relatives or friends, or it's really a private matter between the couple?
My advice would be it's a private matter because, if you just start talking about your friends, they may try to get their 2 cents into it, and even if they are an attorney, they may give you a lot of bad advice. So I don't recommend that. Of course, if they want to talk to their friends and family, I can't stop that, but it wouldn't be the best practice.
And even the idea of it, you're from your experience and as a legal counselor, you're advising people the reasons why they should seriously consider it.
Yes, that's right. But they usually come to me. I'm not fishing out, going for people to say, hey, do you want a prenup? But when they come to me, they've already kind of made up their mind that they think this is a good idea, or their fiance says, hey, I'm getting a prenup, you need to hire an attorney, and they will hire my services.
And again, on both sides, the lawyers should be experienced in the issue of prenups.
They should absolutely be experienced in the issue of prenups. You can't, if I was, a corporate attorney and has no experience in prenup or matrimonial law, that would not be a good thing for me just to try to figure things out.
And even you're an experienced matrimonial attorney as well, but not all matrimonial attorneys are as experienced in drafting prenups.
That's right. Some attorneys don't do it. They may have seen some, but right, you want somebody who has experience drafting prenup agreements, seeing them from other sides, the whole thing.
And someone can always try to challenge them, but you mentioned some ways to try to make the prenup bulletproof.
As best as possible. Again, have it signed many months before the wedding date. Each side have an attorney, the listing of the assets that we said, and the other thing that I do is have both parties sign the agreement at the same time. Let's say in my office, or it could be the other attorney's office. That doesn't matter. But you don't want one party to sign it one day and then mail it to the other attorney, and then the other party signs it. You can do that, but again, not the best practice.
And I guess also there has to be, the court has to be satisfied that there's no duress or coercion involved in signing it.
That's right, although that can be difficult to prove, duress and coercion, but that's like any contract. If that can be proven, which is difficult, then it would invalidate a contract.
And what if one party said, I'm not marrying you unless you sign the prenup? Would that be duress or coercion?
If you can prove that, and if, I said to my fiance, right, just what you said, I'm not going to marry you unless you sign this prenup, that would be a form of coercion or duress. And if it can be proven, then it can invalidate.
And especially if you did it at the 11th hour.
Especially if you do it the day of the wedding. A couple of days before the wedding, or the 11th hour.
Or like in the movies. Okay,
right.
We're going to take a short break now. We've been talking about prenuptial agreements with our guest, David Badanes. And after the break, he'll tell you more about prenups and also tell you how to get free information about prenups on his website and in his blog. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHBC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and also over the internet at ncc.edu/WHBC. We'll be back in a moment.
This portion of programming on WHPC is brought to you on behalf of the Nassau County Bar Association, who wants you to know about ADR, Alternate Dispute Resolution, which can help you avoid costly, lengthy, and uncertain litigation in court. By resolving disputes through mediation or arbitration, it gives you control over who decides your case. A mediator helps all parties to reach an agreement they can live with, or an arbitrator selected by the parties hears and decides the case. Your attorney can still represent you, but you control who decides your case. ADR is faster and less stressful than fighting in court, and it is a great way to resolve divorce, employment, or commercial disputes. ADR is now offered through the Nassau County Bar Association. Find out more about how ADR can help resolve your dispute by calling 516-747-4070 or visit nassaubar.org.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. My guest is attorney David Badanes, and he's a matrimonial attorney and also very experienced in drafting prenups. And we'll talk about prenuptial agreements and what they are and when you should think about having one. That's important information if you know people out there. And David, as you mentioned before the break, it can also be entered into by someone after the marriage
That's right. A post-nuptials, it
and
would
can
have,
cover the same things.
it would probably cover the same thing. Typically, though, post-nuptials usually are a little bit cover a very specific item. Not necessarily, but that's typically what happens in post-nup. It's something happened that the couples realized that they want to protect for whatever reason. So, in general terms, a post-nup is a little bit more specific.
Well, let's say conditions change after the marriage for better or worse, or there's some new development. Is that an appropriate time to consider a post-nuptial agreement? And post just means after the marriage.
That's right. Post just means that. Quite honestly, what usually happens, why people happen in a post-nup is this is almost a little bit like the movies, where one party will find out the other party was cheating on them, and they'll say, wait a minute, the only way I'm going to stay married to you is if you enter a post-nup. That's okay. That's not really considered duress or coercion because they're already married, okay? So they're just saying that, you cheated on me. I could get a divorce today, but, I'll stay, but we have to enter this post-nup.
Or maybe there is some disparity of income, or some people think there's going to be a disparity of income, and they just want to redefine the economic.
That could be it. And again, and the other reason would be that they realize that they're going to come into a lot of money from an inheritance or a gift, and they want to make sure that gets protected after the marriage.
And it's very clear. There might be ways to keep it separate from the marital property, but this was a way of
really
safeguarding that.
Belts and suspenders, as attorneys use that term, because there is a way, of course, if you have a gift or an inheritance, it could still be your separate property even though you're married, but by having a post-nup, that kind of really nails it down.
And it shows both parties' understanding, which is all a contract does.
That's right.
And what are some other things that could be covered? You've told us a little bit. Tell us some more about what could be covered in a
So again,
prenup.
with real estate, it could be your primary home, your summer home. Let's say you have some rental property, and I think I mentioned before, homes owned by your parents that may come to you, a family-owned business, a retirement assets are very important. We collections, coin collection, card collections. Sometimes a party, they have that beforehand, and they don't want that to be, divvied up, so to speak. If there's a trust or a partnership that you had before the marriage, and then another thing what we haven't said is debts. Let's say that your partner has a lot of credit card debt or whatever, and you don't want to have to take that on after the marriage.
And that would still be valid against third parties if you didn't sign on?
Well, what do you mean? Mean the debts?
Yes.
Well, again, it depends on how the debt is structured, but you can...
But if it was a credit card that your wife or your spouse had, and you didn't sign on as a responsible party,
then it would still be valid against that third party.
And you mentioned retirement assets. What exactly does that mean?
Well, let's say, and this happens very often, let's say you're
a pension,
a police officer or a teacher that has a very good pension, and you had that a little bit before you got married, because once you get married, in general terms, the half of that pension will be, your spouse's property. So you can protect that in the prenup.
And this could be true if it's a first or a second marriage.
First, second, third, fourth, or whatever.
And some people think about prenups in terms of a second or third marriage because they might have already undergone a expensive and litigious divorce, and they want to prevent that from happening. And also they may have accumulated more property.
That's right. Many times people enter into a prenup because they've had that first divorce. It was very messy, very expensive, took a lot of time.
And very uncertain.
And this is a way to kind of help that out.
And for the reasons you've mentioned, it makes just as much sense in a first marriage.
Absolutely.
And even after people have gotten married, just to put some clarity in it.
Yes, that's right.
And you also mentioned that other professionals could be consulted before a person enters the prenup.
Right. I will tell my clients, do you have a financial advisor, an accountant? Those are people that I may want to talk to, or they may want to talk to before entering the prenup. So again, knowing what their assets are, and this will help out the situation. And then we may also have to get an appraiser. Let's say they have a house and they don't know how much it's worth, or they have expensive jewelry and they may think it's a $10,000 piece of jewelry, but it could be worth $50,000. Who knows? I don't like to guess, so I can get an appraiser.
So that should be clarified before it's covered in a prenup.
Well, again, because we're going to put what the value of the asset is, or at least approximate value. Again, if we had a piece of jewelry, that's a very good example. I want to know, again, pretty close what it's worth.
And you may not be in the relationship business, but if, let's say, they're coming to you for a prenup, but there may be some discomfort in entering into the prenup because of other, let's say, relationship issues. In addition to those other advices, the people sometimes go for premarital counseling.
Absolutely, yeah.
To make sure
That's right.
They're good about the relationship they're about to enter into, and working out potential problems before rather than after.
That's right. And sometimes I do recommend that as well. And they can go to a counseling service, and that's also a great idea.
Because they find they can't work out these issues. This is certainly not going to make it any easier after the marriage.
It's certainly not. It's usually worse.
Okay. And then they have it's so much harder to get that divorce.
It's an old saying: it's easy to get married and hard to get the divorce.
Harder to get divorced.
Yeah.
At least harder and more expensive.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Any other tips you have for things that people should think about before they get married for the first or second time? And maybe involving the prenup, which we haven't covered yet.
Again, it's just good to talk to an attorney that's experienced in this area, and make sure you know what you're doing before you sign anything. Just because someone says, "Hey, I want to sign this prenup," don't just do it. You should really consult with a good attorney.
And it's really just a contingent contract, just to make it clear.
Right.
If it in the remote chance we get divorced, here's how we're both agreeing to split assets. So you want to protect some, or the other person wants to protect other things. It just lays it all out, and it avoids an expensive legal battle over them.
And it can give you actually peace of mind. I think you mentioned that before, where you know how things are going to be separated, and this way, if it like I said, we saw in insurance, you're not expecting to get divorced, but if it does happen, this lays out what's going to happen.
Now, if you have a child from a prior relationship, and you want to make sure they're covered in a divorce, you can make provisions for those.
Well, again, you can't say about child custody.
Not custody, but
you can, in a sense, do it in a way by saying, I'm going to get so many assets from our marriage, and in that sense, you'll be able to cover this child that you may have had before the marriage.
Okay. And then a will, again, some point there might be some reasons to have there certainly is a reasons to draft a will after a divorce, but because of the right of election, which would be the other spouse's right to a minimum amount in a divorce by operation of law,
right.
This would cover the obligations under that.
That's right. You can put, you can waive that right of election in the prenup, and this way, if a divorce does happen, and you can make that very clear in the prenup that if there's no divorce, the spouse gets everything, but if there's a divorce, you're waiving that election.
But there would have to be some consideration for that waiving the right of election, some allocation to the spouse, or an insurance policy, something in lieu of a support.
Not necessarily, because again, the prenup by itself would have consideration. I mean, any contract has to have consideration.
Okay. We have a few more minutes. Any other tips to people why they should think about the prenup?
Well, if you want to go to my website, www.dbnylaw.com, I have a page about prenuptial agreements. I have a video. I do have blogs on my website about prenups, and that would give you more information.
And again, it's always good to be informed, because an informed consumer is always, and an informed marital spouse is always going to make better decisions.
Absolutely, no matter what kind of subject you're talking about.
And do you find when you handle divorces that a large number of people do have prenups, or some are sorry that they did not have them?
Certainly, a lot of people are sorry they didn't have one, but quite honestly, it's a very small percentage of people that have prenups. I don't know the exact number, but it's pretty small.
And do people think about it more when they're going into a second or third marriage?
Yes, that's true. Absolutely. Because again, as we mentioned before, they know how bad it is going through a messy divorce in the first time, and they want to avoid that if it happens for their second or third marriage.
And even if they're on a level playing field in terms of assets or circumstances, they want to avoid all the drama of a divorce.
That's right. Just like you said, doesn't matter if you aren't equally have the equal number of assets or equal number of income or whatever it may be. Again, it can give you peace of mind, just like insurance can, that again, this is how our divorce is going to happen. And one thing we didn't mention was that you could also say that you're going to go to divorce mediation, instead of hiring attorneys to do your divorce, and that would be a valid clause as well.
And this would almost be like a divorce agreement and a partnership agreement. Some provisions, what
Yes.
will happen if one person leaves or is kicked out or dies. This would, it'd be an agreement like if you were dissolving a business or partnership.
It's a pretty good analogy. When there's a partnership agreements, they have a dissolution article in it, and that's a pretty good analogy, yes.
Okay, and just give us your website once again.
Sure, www.dbnylaw.com.
And again, someone should think about this perhaps after the engagement, but well before the marriage.
That's right, right, and sometimes even before the engagement. They know the engagement's coming, but certainly you don't want to enter a prenup that day of the wedding, the day before, even a week before is not a great idea.
Right. And what about the cost?
Well, I do, flat fee, and it depends when I talk to the people what
how much is
charge.
involved.
But I like this way; they know exactly what the cost is going to be, and it it makes it very easy for the client.
And as you said, one person can pay the other person's cost of doing it, but they have to have their own independent attorney.
That's right. Everybody has to be independent, but paying the other attorney does not make it invalid in any way.
Okay, and just give us your website one more time.
Sure. www.dbnylaw.com. And my name is David Badanes.
And as you've heard, whatever you've heard today has been presented as information only. You must get legal advice from your own attorney, and you can get additional information on David's website. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3, the voice of Nassau Community College, and also over the internet at ncc.edu/WHPC. If you missed any part of this discussion, you can find the podcast for free on iTunes by searching WHPC. Please join us next week at this same time for another program on Law You Should Know.